Morning everyone, today we're going to look at environmental responsibility. So what is environmental responsibility? Well, the term actually refers to the duty humans have to respect, care and preserve the natural world. Religious believers often refer to sacred texts and accounts of creation to inform them on how they should treat the world. Similarly, non-religious individuals recognise the need to preserve the world for future generations, so it is something that everyone tends to agree on. The Genesis account of creation often gives Christians guidance on their role on earth. In both accounts of creation, mankind is given a responsibility to care for the world. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." Adam's also given the responsibility of naming all the creatures, again implying mankind has superiority over the animals. However, there's a difference of opinions to the extent to which we have to care for the world. Traditionally, many Christians believed that humans had been given dominion, meaning power or control. This was based on the creation account in Genesis, which stated, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air.'" This reference to rule was interpreted very literally to mean that humans were in a position of power and thus had complete dominion. It was also supported by other areas of the Bible which seemed to imply the human superiority and status. For example, in Psalm 8 it says, "You have made them a little lower than angels and crowned them with glory and honour. You made them rulers over the works of your hand. You put everything under their feet." In contemporary society, many Christians disagree with the very literal interpretation of the word rule in Genesis, and instead interpret this to imply that we have stewardship, the God-given responsibility to care for the planet. Instead of ruling over the planet, the contemporary understanding is that we have to care for it and use natural resources sustainably. Whilst God gave us the earth to live in, ultimately it still belongs to him. And Genesis goes as far to say that God was happy with his creation when it was made, implying a greater responsibility to preserve it. For example, Psalm 24 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." As part of mankind's responsibility to be stewards, they must use natural resources responsibly so that all people, animals, plants and future generations can flourish. This is referred to as environmental sustainability, ensuring that natural resources are used in a responsible way so that they don't run out. Mankind then have to think of themselves as a global citizen, all who contribute to the world community and don't waste the resources we have. Many organisations such as Christian Aid have actively tried to promote environmental sustainability. For example, Christian Aid has developed a programme called Sustainable Development Goals that seeks to educate people. It says education is a key to delivering global goals. In 2019, one non-religious environmental group called Extinction Rebellion launched a 5-day campaign in major cities across the UK, including Cardiff. They blocked many roads in an attempt to raise awareness of climate change and urge the government to act. They said they wanted to dramatically accelerate its actions in tackling the climate crisis and ecological emergency. Whilst the protest received much criticism, religious figures such as the Bishop of Llandaff, Bishop June, spoke out to support their goals. She said, "We support peaceful protests that raise awareness of the need to act now, to find the political will to protect the interests of future generations." Muslims also have many teachings regarding environmental responsibility. Muslims believe that everything is on loan from Allah and therefore it needs to be preserved. They believe that the universe has a pattern and balance which Allah has instilled, known as fitra. The survival of the world relies on this balance being maintained. Like Christians, Muslims believe that Allah has appointed them to be stewards or guardians over the planet. This is often referred to as being a Khalifa. Muslim Aid is an organisation rooted in Muslim beliefs and teachings, and they actively try to promote sustainable development and global citizenship through long-term projects such as making communities self-sufficient. They're often inspired by the words of Prophet Muhammad in the Hadith, who said, "The earth is green and beautiful, and Allah has appointed you his stewards or Khalifas over it. Whoever plants a tree and diligently looks after it until it matures and bears fruit is rewarded." As humanists don't believe in God and don't accept the religious accounts of creation, their attitudes towards environmental responsibility don't come from a sense of duty to God or a desire to preserve what he's created. Instead, they try and base their thinking on reasoning, evidence and empathy towards others. Most humanists agree in principle with stewardship and agree that we should care for the planet in order to preserve it for future generations, but this is based on logic and reason. One humanist who's spoken a lot about our responsibility towards the earth is Carl Sagan. He said, "The earth is the only world known so far to harbour life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known." Humanists for a Better World is a group linked to the British Humanist Association. The basic principles and values of this organisation are founded on the Declaration of Human Rights. They argue that there are many countries where people's human rights are under threat from poverty, hunger, exploitation and climate change. As such, Humanists for a Better World advocates environmental sustainability. Their aim is to put their humanist values into action and attempt to educate people that we are all responsible for the earth. So in the exam, you could be asked whether or not mankind has a responsibility to use the natural resources sustainably. Many Christians in contemporary society argue that the Bible promotes stewardship, the God-given responsibility to care for the world. It's based on Genesis 1 that says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness and let them rule over." As rulers or stewards, we have a responsibility to promote sustainable and responsible use of all the resources in the world. In addition, many Muslims might argue that using resources sustainably will bring them rewards in the afterlife. In Islam, they believe that the world has a natural balance known as fitra, and this balance can be maintained by responsible use of the resources. Muslims believe that Allah has appointed them as caliphs. It says that the earth is green and beautiful, and Allah has appointed you his stewards over it. As such, those who use resources sustainably will be rewarded by Allah. Christians and Muslims also share the view that the world ultimately belongs to God. Muslims believe that everything is on loan from Allah and consequently the resources must be preserved and used responsibly. Similarly, in the Bible in Psalms it says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Consequently, misuse of resources would be seen as disrespectful to God and his creation. Finally then, many humanists would agree that we need to preserve the resources for future generations. They make their decisions based on reason and empathy, and whilst they don't accept religious accounts of stewardship, they recognise that we need to preserve the world and its resources for future generations. Humanist Carl Sagan commissioned the pale blue dot and said, "Look again at this dot, that's here, that's home. The earth is the only world known so far to harbour life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate." On the other hand, traditionally many literal Christians argued that resources were made by God to benefit humans. According to the Genesis account, God gave Adam and Eve the natural resources. In Genesis 1 it says God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing plant on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seeds." As such, many argue that the resources were there simply to benefit humans, and we can use them however we wish. In addition, many Christians might interpret Genesis to suggest that humans have been given dominion over the earth, meaning power or control. That means that we can use the earth and its resources however we wish. This is based again on Genesis 1 that says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness and let them rule over." This could imply then that we can use the resources however we wish, even if it's not sustainable. Finally, some could argue that we have free will to use resources however we want. In Galatians 5 it says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free." Because of that, we could argue that we can use resources however we want to, even if it's not sustainable. Humanists similarly don't have any sense of obligation or devotion to a divine creator, so could place less emphasis on stewardship. Hope you found that information useful. If you want to test yourself, go on Quizlet or Kahoot. If not, try the practice exam questions on the following slide. Good luck!
If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Space is filled with a network of wormholes. You might emerge somewhere else in space, somewhere else in time. The sky calls to us. If we do not destroy ourselves, we will one day venture to the stars. A still more glorious dawn awaits, not a sunrise, but a galaxy rise. A morning filled with 400 billion suns. The rising of the Milky Way. Cosmos is full beyond measure. of the awesome machinery of nature. I believe our future depends powerfully on